Okay, if we look at the individual papers now, as I say, for the first four of the skill papers, we're going to just break it down into two slides, and then the last two, F8 and F9, we are just going to look at one slide for each of those papers. Again, I should stress that we're not looking at the in-depth technical detail of these papers. We're just giving you an overview of what is to be expected and some of the points that you need to take on board when you start your studies. Again, this is all about getting yourself ready for the skills papers. So F4 is a corporate and business law paper. The main law paper that is being tested here is that of English law, but you do have a choice. There are various variants, including, as we've mentioned here, a global variance, Russia, China, and many others. There are about 10 law variants that you can choose. So we would advise you here, depending upon where you are in the world, have a look at the ACCA website, and if you are more adept at a local law and there is a local variant for your country, then maybe it's better to choose that as the law paper that you are going to sit. You do have a choice when you're signing yourself up for these papers as to whether you take the main English law paper or whether you take one of the variants. Just as a point on these variants, we'll see in a second that F6 also allows you to choose tax variants. You can choose the variants individually. A few years ago, if you took a variant for F4, you had to take a variant for F6 as well. That's no longer the case. So on a paper by paper basis, you choose the variant, or whether you take the main paper, you make the choice in advance on there. Just to give you an example of the English law and the global law paper, 70% of those two papers share the same syllabus. So if you're taking either English law or global law, then much of the syllabus, much of your learning materials will be the same. With F4, there is no underpinning paper. So there's nothing coming really from F1, 2, and 3. So it's standalone. You don't need any legal knowledge to answer this paper. You don't need a legal background. That's a better way of putting it, to know this paper. And again, you're not being examined in the in-depth technicalities of law. You're really being looked and examined at how law impacts upon the accountant. So don't worry too much if you've had no legal background, no legal training at all. You don't need it. It's self-sufficient within the F4 paper. Once you've passed F4, it doesn't then move into a higher level law paper, but some of the issues from F4 do feed into other papers such as F7, financial reporting, F8, the audit and assurance, and P2, the corporate reporting. So you do need to retain a little bit of the F4 knowledge, not that great for the other papers once you've passed it. The exam then, it's quite unique in as such as there are 10 questions on the paper, each worth 10 marks. Again, emphasising there is no choice. The paper is wholly written. You really won't find any numbers involved as such. There might be a little bit of numbers in a scenario, but you really wouldn't need to take your calculator in with you. One of the big problems we've found with students in the past is they've moved from the multiple choice papers F1, 2, and 3 into a written exam, F4, and they found it very difficult to write. So you've got to make sure that your written word is legible. So your handwriting has got to be reasonably clear. The markers have got to be able to read your scripts. If markers can't read your written word, then they can't give you any marks. Only you as an individual know how good or bad your handwriting is. So make sure that your answers are legible. And if in doubt, when you get the answer booklets, you'll find that they are lined. And what I advise my students to do, especially if their handwriting isn't that brilliant, is miss a line. So write on every other line. At least then you don't get your words merging into one another. In terms of your English, you've obviously got to answer the paper in English, but the markers, the examiners know that many of the students, English is not their first language. So you're not going to be marked desperately down if your grammar, your punctuation, your spelling is not perfect. Even many English students still get their grammar and their spelling wrong. So don't worry too much about the grammatical side. I'm not saying ignore grammar, because the markers again have got to be able to understand what you're saying, but don't get too stressed about your written grammatical English. As long as it's legible and can be understood, that is the main thing. Okay, the first 7 questions tend to be factual based questions, and according to examiners' comments, they tend to be answered quite well. So the examiner isn't overly concerned about the first 7 questions. There are streams going through each period that some do some questions better than others, but generally speaking, the examiner is reasonably happy with those first 7 questions. The problems, as far as the examiner is concerned, tend to be from questions 8, 9 and 10. These are little scenario-based case studies where you've got to apply your law knowledge. And the examiner stresses here that you, first of all, need to identify the relevant law that's being tested. Is it contract law? Is it some other form of law that's being tested on there? Where you know the law, state the case, if relevant. State case law that you should have learnt in your studies. Then apply that particular law to the relevant or to the particular scenario, and ultimately draw a conclusion. But again, with that final point, drawing a conclusion, it's not important that the conclusion exactly matches what the examiner has written in their suggested solution. As long as your logic building up to that conclusion has been correct, then you can still earn marks if you reach a different conclusion to that mentioned by the examiner. So those are some of the points relevant to F4, some of the points mentioned by the F4 examiner.